come back to your calls on that in just a few moments. But I want to touch on what we're going to see and hear later tonight on LBC. President Donald Trump is going to address the Republican National Convention on its final night ahead of that election in November. Mica Mosbacher is a member of the Trump 2020 campaign's advisory board and joins me live. Welcome to the programme again tonight, Mica.
Good evening, Tom.
What are we expecting the president to say?
Tonight, President Trump will make his case in fiery, provocative, Trumpian fashion and lay out a vision for the great American comeback. He'll highlight the stark reality between the two warring ideologies in this country. America as we know it, a land of opportunity and prosperity that embraces tradition and GOP values versus a cancel culture revolution in this country and a steep turn towards socialism, and also the 47 years of rhetoric by Biden versus Trump's strong record on the economy. And I wanted to say, Tom, that I did watch the Democratic convention, and listening to their messaging was a lot like watching a chameleon change colors on a strobe light. 1 minute Biden was a moderate, the next he was a progressive, and the next almost a Trojan horse, as Vice President Pence said last night, for the radical left wing of the party. And indeed, Biden pivoted again today regarding his stance on peaceful protesting versus looting and rioting, which tells me that Trump's law and order message is resonating now with this country.
So one of the things he will highlight is the flip-flopping in the Democrats. I mean, it's an accusation that I'm afraid can also be levelled at the president. What is his view on masks these days?
His view on what, Tom? I didn't quite understand.
On masks, on the wearing of masks to combat the coronavirus.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, obviously, scientists had disagreed and sent out conflicting messaging at the beginning of this, especially through the
scientists
CDC.
Dictated what the president was saying.
Well, it was the governors. He left it up to the governors in the individual states. But I must say that from what I've observed, most individuals are now wearing masks. They're mandated here in Texas, for example, and which is very interesting. So I think at first people were struggling against their, right to individual freedoms versus the fact that this is really the only defense we have right now against the virus.
They weren't getting much direction from the President of the United States either. You talk about his rhetoric about making a comeback, America making a comeback. Who's been in charge for the last 4 years?
Well, I think President Trump has, and he certainly has a strong resume to run on. If you look at his accomplishments... So what are they comebacking from? We're coming back from the setback due to the pandemic, as you mentioned, and he's going to reassure Americans because we've got, 1 million plus Americans still out of work, even though many of the jobs have been restored in the last 3 months.
And nearly 1,000 dying a day.
Yeah, absolutely. And you will hear some empathy toward those individuals who have lost lives and lost loved ones, as well as what he plans to do. He built a robust economy before with record low employment, especially among women. And he's done it before. He'll do it again. And that's the optimistic message that I think Americans need to hear at this point.
Why is the polling so bad among women?
Polling is never right. It wasn't right during the 2016 election. The only poll that I agree with right now is the
Trump's
recent
personal polling right? Because he points to his personal ratings going up. Is that wrong too?
No, it's not. And I'll tell you why.
Hang on. So some polling is right if it's favourable to the president, but everything else is rubbish.
No. We're looking at our internal polling, but what I always look at is the amount of money raised, especially by small donors. The RNC has raised a record amount of money. I look at the enthusiasm gap between the Democrats and the Republicans and the fact that we have one of the largest armies on the ground, 1.9 million volunteers who are charged with getting out the vote, working phone banks, and giving virtual events. And, we went from in-person events and rallies to a 24-hour virtual campaign and have done it successfully. So I look at the enthusiasm and the fact that, again, so many of our donations coming in are small donors.
But just not the polls. You don't look at the polls because the polls are all wrong apart from the ones that... make him look good.
I believe there was only one poll that was right in 2016. I've never looked at polls, and I've been in politics for 30 years. I'm dating myself.
Let me ask you. You talk about the what's happening on the streets when it comes to driving out the vote, but of course, lots is happening on American streets right now, including a lot of violence. Yes. Kamala Harris, the Democratic nomination for VP, has given this sort of pre-rebuttal tonight to Donald Trump's anticipated speech, and talking about the issue of Jacob Blake. I wonder if you take a listen.
We also see pain, hurt, and destruction in the aftermath of yet another black man shot by police. Jacob Blake shot 7 times in the back in broad daylight in front of his 3 young sons. 7 times in the back in broad daylight in front of his 3 young sons. As Vice President Biden put it, the shots fired at Mr. Blake pierced the soul of our nation. It's sickening to watch. It's all too familiar. And it must end.
Kamala Harris speaking earlier tonight. What does President Trump make of that shooting incident?
Well, he has condemned violence. And also what happened to Floyd and what happened in Wisconsin is a disgrace, absolutely a disgrace, and should not happen in America.
However, the shooting should not happen, or are you talking about everything that's happened in Wisconsin?
No,
specifically the shooting of that man in the back 7 times.
Yeah, specific shootings by certain overzealous police officers. But I want to point out that according to the New York Times, during Kamala's tenure as AG, as the top cop of California, she avoided intervening in cases involving killings by police. And so her record haunted her during the primaries, where she dropped out with only 2% of the vote. And she's going to have a tough time dealing with this history of also incarcerating more black men under her tenure as AG than had happened in the past. And that's the New York Times. It tends to be very
Kamala
unfavorable
Harris and Joe Biden will all have to answer for their records, as will Donald Trump in this election campaign. Mica Mosbacher, thank you for your time tonight. You're a member of the Trump 2020 Campaigns Advisory Board. That speech coming in about, what do we reckon, fellas? About 45 minutes or so, we think, UK time, maybe a bit later. Of course, you'll hear it on LBC as and when it takes place.